All right. So welcome to the Sedated Man. I want to thank you for being here. If this is your first time, thanks for checking us out. And if you're a regular listener, thanks for returning. I'd also like to ask that after the podcast, you take a minute and leave a review on whatever platform you happen to be listening on. And lastly, we keep our show notes on patreon.com/the Sedated Man. And you can give and help support the podcast there as well. So today is episode 53, and it's our interview with Joe Prim of the Ever Vigilant Podcast. And I'm pretty excited. This is the first of many interviews the Sedated Man will be doing, where we'll be really digging into where men are at, where men need to be, and where they think they're at and where they think they need to be, because those things are not always the same. So with that, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, Joe?
Well, first off, thanks for inviting me to hang out with you, Mike, and be the first guy to have a conversation with you here on Sedated Man. It's pretty cool. I appreciate it. Kind of an honor to hang out with you and be able to chat a little bit about what's important to us, and what's motivating us to do something crazy like this and go out on a limb and start making podcasts and trying to get more involved in a bigger and have a bigger impact on the men in our communities and kind of all over the place, via podcasts. So I've been doing Ever Vigilant now, really with a strong focus on men and brotherhood. And our mission is to challenge and encourage men to prepare, defend, and lead at home in their communities. And that has really been like I said, for about a year and a half, the real mission behind what I'm doing with Ever Vigilant Podcast. And got a website we're working on, always updating and adding articles to, and trying to create through vigilantwolf.com something that's even more than the podcast, a place where men can be equipped to prepare, defend, and lead at home in their communities. So it's kind of a wild ride that, God's kind of led me into. And one of the best parts of the wild ride has definitely been getting to know guys like you and have conversations with guys like you and be able to go back and forth and bounce ideas off of one another and encourage one another, because this isn't always what some people think it is. So thanks for having me, Mike.
Absolutely. It's awesome that I can start this process. I was really intimidated technically, because I don't have a lot of time. So figuring this out. So I appreciate you being the first one. So on Ever Vigilant, when you interviewed me, we talked a lot about brotherhood, and you told me at one point that one of your main messages is brotherhood. What do you think? Because we both run across a lot of men every day, guys we go to church with, guys we work with, guys we just happen to run across. And a lot of them really have no concept of what brotherhood is. They think brotherhood is just hanging out and drinking beer at the bar. And although there's a certain aspect of that, I would say, that pertains to brotherhood, it's not true brotherhood. So what do you think then is the most productive way to build a brotherhood?
And I don't think there is a way to build brotherhood without being very intentional about it. Mm-hmm. I believe that brotherhood is truly only earned and forged by difficult times and difficult situations. And sometimes those difficult situations can be manufactured, maybe going on a camping trip, maybe doing something, preparing for a marathon or some kind of Ironman challenge or something like that, mud race, where you're doing something that's getting everybody outside of their comfort zone, or you and one other guy outside your comfort zone to do something it's bigger than yourselves. It's forging character outside of within yourself, but then you're also sharing that building of character with the group. I think it's really important for men to, especially talking about Christian men. I think that for far too long we've had this circle of chairs in a church basement. And, whether it's bringing donuts in or whatever, chips and Mountain Dew. We're not stupid. We're men. We can learn that way. And we're fully capable of learning that way. But the reality is if that's what we're going to do, we might as well bring the women into it and enjoy that time of learning with our wives. Because bonding between men really doesn't take place like that. It never has. That's not how God designed us to be. God really designed us to be out in hunting parties or exploring or warring with one another. And those life before this kind of candy land where we're living in right now was always a battle. Life was always difficult. Life was always hard. So just men being outside, away from their home together, forged that brotherhood. And, the more, see, for me, this whole brotherhood concept is, I grew up in the church, so it's completely foreign to me. And is only through really praying and meditating and listening to God, did I come to the realization of how much it was missing in my life. And the reality is I'm the kind of guy that has no problem sitting in the back of a room and be completely non-social. That's my personality. I'm completely content that way. I've got no need. There's a big part of me that feels like I have no need for other people in my life. And just the fact that I'm doing this type of thing shows how important, or how strongly God showed me that this stuff is necessary and this stuff is important. And, so once you kind of start going down this rabbit trail and you're praying through these things and you're trying to, praying, well, why is this important, God? Why is this so important? Because if this is as important as you're making me think it is, then how could we be so far away from it? So you start, reading different books, and over and over and over again, this brotherhood issue keeps coming up, whether it be about the suicide epidemic that's going on really right now with men on unprecedented levels. The number of times my wife will bring to my attention somebody that she knows, or somebody that a friend of her knows whose husband has committed suicide, with leaving young kids, Mike, young kids, between the ages of 5, kids that are still in high school that don't know what happened or where something could have gone wrong. And those kids for the rest of their life will be wondering, and unfortunately, a lot of them maybe even blaming themselves for the rest of their lives, wondering what they could have done differently to save their dad. And I really think that the lack of brotherhood and having people in my family that are close to me that have suffered with depression, I see that once you get to that point, you're not going to go looking for help. You're not going to start making phone calls and ask guys to come out to dinner with you, or to try to work things out in your life. And that's why, if even, to some points, we'll start talking about the fact that each of our lives may depend on the fact that we build this brotherhood and start building this brotherhood now. Because, like I said, once you get to that point, you're not going to be looking for people. And we need to build those relationships so that when that guy disappears out of the group, or we don't get a phone call from that guy or text message from somebody for a week or two, that we start looking for them, that we start going out and saying, hey, something's wrong here.
Yeah.
And start asking amongst one another what we can do to help change or help remedy the situation. And so the reality is, I'm not really sure what your question was, Jim or Mike, but
it's all good.
But I think it's detrimental to each and every one of us to, be doing everything we can to try to build that brotherhood.
Right. So the most productive way then, basically. So the question was, what do you think the most productive way is? And so basically what you're saying, the most productive way is for dudes to get up off their butts and quit thinking about themselves and start thinking about the guy next to him, because it's just like the military. I was National Guard, granted, but I've been deployed twice. I've been to Iraq, and if you can't depend on the guy next to you, you've got a problem. And, all these things, people, they watch Band of Brothers and they watch the Avengers and they watch all this stuff. And it's because they crave that. That's that part of them reaching out, craving that closeness and that bravery and that courage that comes from that teamwork. And it's because they crave it, because it's lacking. Mm-hmm. And what they don't realize is that it's lacking in them, because they go to the theater or they go wherever and they get it, sedated. And then they go home with their fix. But no, I absolutely agree. Brotherhood, the next question was actually, how do we break our comfort zones and then push other men to do the same? really, the time for encouragement. Okay, let me back up. Encouragement is absolutely vital. Okay, if we don't encourage one another, we don't build up the body. However, the time for encouraging a guy to get off his butt is past. You need to start pushing.
Yeah.
Okay. What are your thoughts on that, Joe?
It is unbelievably difficult to get guys to go beyond something of comfort. Because whenever will bring up this topic with other Christian men, all of them will nod in agreement and know full well that they need to make some changes in their lives, that they crave this type of brotherhood that they had when they were a kid running around the neighborhood. All of us know or have had glimpses in our lives of what that looks like, or what we think that would be like. But like everything else in your life, Mike, if you want something, you have to go out and get it, and you have to make it happen. God didn't just give the Israelites the promised land.
No.
They had to go out and fight for it. He
Yeah.
said, I'm promising you this. I'm giving you this. Now go and fight for it. And it's the same with brotherhood. It's the same with losing weight. It's the same with kicking an addiction. Yes, I promised you that I will help you get to this, but you're going to have to work your butt off. And you know what? You might die somewhere along the way, and you might lose some friends somewhere along the way. But the reality is, if you want this, if you really need this, you're going to have to work for it.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of failures in trying to build brotherhood. I've had a lot of guys that I've taken out for breakfast on numerous occasions, done everything I could to try to build up that relationship, to seek something a little bit deeper, thought that they were kind of going along with me and understood what I was trying to do, and only to have somewhere along the line just disappear. And I think the biggest crutch and the biggest mistake that Christian men are their biggest excuse is their family. And I really think it's shameful that men who know that they need something, and brotherhood will only make you a stronger man, a better leader, a better husband, a better father. If you have somebody that you can talk through your problems with, or somebody that can give you advice because they've been there and done that, instead of you trying to take it all upon yourself. But they'll continue to over and over and over again believe that the only place for a Christian man to be is every single night when he leaves work back at home with his family. Yeah. It's okay for his wife to have craft night, or to even go out and do something else a couple nights a week with her women friends. But his wife and children will be his excuse every single night of the week. And I mean, it's embarrassing, to be honest with you, quite embarrassing as a grown man to hear that.
But that's what churches have come up to grow into now, is, we come here Wednesday nights or Thursday nights, depending on the church. And then we come here Sunday morning and sometimes Sunday evening. And so long as you show up and you tithe, and tithe is a whole different conversation, but some guys call it church tax, and I think that's the case in some cases. But but you're right. So they think that they need to be at home. Now, there are guys that I say will hide in the gospel, and what they'll do is they'll run from their family's problems in Bible study, all right, which is not the place to hide. And so they use the gospel as a shield to hide from their family. In the case that we're talking about, people are using their families to hide from the church, to hide from the body. And, it's funny because I'm not going to lie, I've been a lone wolf for a long, long time. And I understand brotherhood is absolutely essential, and I get it. And it's not that I don't want it. It's really hard when you have been around, and I'm sure that you can understand this as well. It's really hard when you've been around guys that you don't have your back, to really put yourself out there and I have no problem having another guy's back, but knowing he doesn't have mine, that does affect the relationship, and it does affect the brotherhood. And it just makes you, as a man, if you have any gumption and any balls to make this happen, makes you draw back a little more. When in truth, we really got to start kicking these guys in the butts. And I don't think there's any shame in calling a guy out and saying, look, Sally, you need to step up. It is time for you to be the man God designed you to be. And I am more than happy to help you do that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think so either. And I think that I mean, it is probably be a pretty fun experiment to see how many guys would just cower and you would never run into them again ever in their route around the church every Sunday morning that they take.
Yeah.
I kind of have a theory, Mike, that if we put tracking devices into all the members of a church, that you would be able to track nearly exactly where they were every Sunday morning at any particular time, because everybody follows the same exact route around the church before service starts and sits down in exactly the same place.
Yeah.
And their route would be changed, and you would probably not bump into them anymore, Mike.
Yeah.
But again, it goes back to, we live in such a strange age of comfort where we can just completely segregate ourselves as lone wolves and try to pretend like we have it all under control and we have it all covered. And this is really a new phenomenon. This is not something that we can even look back to our grandfathers and say, well, my grandfather was the same way.
Yep.
Because, I live in a pretty rural area, and I was talking to an old timer about this time last year. We were working together. It was really interesting because he told me something that I really had no idea of. And it's this. He said that every Sunday, everybody went to town to go to church. So whether you were the Methodist church or the Baptist church or the Catholic church or whatever church you went to, everybody generally went into town to go to their church. He said, and then what would happen is all the families would kind of come out of the churches, and most families would then sit in benches along the main street of the downtown.
Right.
And that gave everybody an opportunity still to see each other at least that once a week, to share with each other what was going on in their lives, decide, ask for help if there was help needed in an area, right? But there was always those relationships were there. Your grandfather didn't ask a stranger to do his taxes or to help him with his taxes. Your grandfather didn't ask a stranger to help him when he was having a mechanical issue with his vehicle or needed to change out a hot water heater. There was always somebody that he knew, whether it was a family member or whether it was somebody that always fixed everything for him or welded things together for him. There was a relationship there. They had all the Elks groups and Moose lodges and Shriners. Yeah. All those were groups of men that got together because they had a common goal, a common drive. So this is really a new phenomenon, and it's kind of strange because this is part of the whole toxic masculinity idea, is they're trying to put out this idea that this is what masculinity is about, this solo, this lone wolf, and that causing aggression and discontentment and the suicide and stuff. But the reality is it's new. This is a new phenomenon. This isn't something that people have been doing for any great length of time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I read Garrett J. White's book, The Black Book or The Warrior Book, and he talks in there about how, back in the day, little Johnny worked right alongside Dad. You know what I mean? And he was out in the field and he was doing all that. And then the Industrial Revolution hit, and then those guys started to move into town, and now Dad was gone a lot, and little Johnny didn't get to go to work with Dad. And so that began that separation, and the mom was, stuck at home the whole time. And then you start to progress, and eventually the mom was removed from the home, and now little Johnny's on his own. And so now you get to today, and this isn't, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to sit here and bash social media, but social media has enabled us now to be so connected that we never have to talk to each other.
Yeah.
And so, and I think that's part of the reason, Joe, that, that things are so odd, I guess, really, that's for lack of a better term. One thing I wanted to mention here was in Ephesians 6 and verse 12, it says, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places." And in verse 13, "Therefore take up the full armor of God so that you'll be able to resist in the evil day, and having done everything to stand firm." It's always funny to me, the pieces that people pull out. Guys will talk all day about take up the full armor, take up the full armor, take up the full armor. What they skip is this part that says, "and having done everything to stand firm." All right. Which goes back to what you were saying. You got to do the work. and brotherhood takes effort. It means you got to put up with that dude you don't like. You know,
Yeah.
it means that sure, that other guy annoys you. It doesn't matter. Be above reproach, as scripture tells you to be. And this, what we're talking about is part of the having done everything to stand firm.
Yeah. And I really think that adversity is a big part of it. I think that, and I think that's part of the reason why it's so important to get men outside of the church, because the reality is, when I know for me personally, when I show up at church service, I have a different heart. I have a different mind about me. I have a mind of reverence and a mind preparing myself for a service and to listening and preparing my heart. And I'm kind of a different guy when I'm not preparing myself that way. I love to bust guys' balls and give guys a hard time in a loving way, in a very, very loving way.
Oh, I understand. Yeah.
And I think that is how God designed us. And I think that is how those relationships are built. It's so strong to have those ties of, remember when you said this, or remember when you did this, or remember when we did this. Those are what builds those ties, those tradition of that into that relationship. Yeah. And those only happen outside of the doors of somebody's comfort zone. And I think, after I started looking into more and more, Harvard came out with a study even that was talking about, it's scientifically proven that that's how men bond. Men bond by doing activities with one another. Yep. And I think if you really want that bond to grow, I think that adversity is without a doubt the way to get it done.
Now, you're putting together on your website, you've got a thing that you're putting together with guys that are experts in their particular fields, right? And I thought that was an awesome job. You and I talked at one point. I would love to see, let me back up here. I have always thought that the reason there are so many denominations is because nobody can talk to each other anymore. So it is totally okay for me to have a different religious conviction than you have. The problem is that we all have the same mission, to seek and save. And if we feel we need to talk to each other, that's great. But things have become so polarized that we can't even sit down and have a conversation without things being thrown and people being angry and just serious division. So the whole idea behind the Sedated Man, for instance, was to put a certain level out there where guys could get to know each other, have a conversation, admit things they were doing, and then begin to build so that they could have those harder conversations. Because as men, we actually, I know this will surprise a few people, we need those hard conversations. I need to be able to sit across from a guy and be so angry at what he says that my face is just red, and still be able to shake that guy's hand and have respect for him and the things he believes when I get up from the table. But that's not what's happening. But that's why I appreciate what you've got going with this website you got going, because you've got guys coming in these specific niches, I guess you could say, promoting brotherhood and biblical manhood on the level that they are best at. Why don't you talk about that just here?
Yeah. I was challenged by actually a really long time listener to my podcast. And he had some real insightful ideas. And one of the things he mentioned to me when we were having a conversation was, a lot of times in your podcast, you talk about doing certain things. Mm-hmm. And he said, the problem is that most guys these days have no reference for that. They have no way of knowing how to get started in any of that thing. He said, maybe your father, your grandfather would know exactly what you're talking about. And maybe because of where you're at in your life, you have a pretty good idea what it means to go hunting or fishing or some of these other areas, or bushcraft, or, some of these other areas where I got these kind of experts guild, I call it, of Ever Vigilant. And so I was really challenged to try to bring things down to a really very, very basic level to give guys a building place to start to build off of. Because it's one thing to tell guys to get off the couch, you need to go do something. Mm-hmm. But a lot of guys don't know what that means or what that looks like, because from the time they were 7 or 8 years old, that's what they did. Yeah. Mom and dad were gone. They sat and watched TV, and they watched the same VHS of Barney over and over and over again.
Oh God, I never watched Barney.
And then when they got a little bit older, it was Mario. And so we've lost a lot of context of what it just means to be able to go outside and find some sort of activity to do. I mean, it's strange to a lot of guys. So that was kind of my challenge, and the reason why I started that up is to kind of bring in some of these guys that are experts in certain areas. Got a guy as a pastor in Arizona coming on and talking about hunting, and we started a series earlier this year about hunting and what you need to do to prepare to go hunting this fall and what you can start this winter. And we're going to keep that going, and what you can do this spring to be prepared for this fall, and what you need to do in your final preparations, this fall to be ready to get out and go on your first hunt. So just to really simplify things, break them down, but again, in a very encouraging yet challenging way. Mm-hmm. And with a true valuable reason behind why you need to get out and do these things. It was great. I had the one guy on, and we were talking about from Beach and Tactical. Jacob from Beach and Tactical came on and was talking about bushcraft, and it was great because he started just talking about like they do these contests where they put a string above where you're going to build your fire.
Right.
And then what they do is then you can make it into a little bit of a contest to see whose fire gets up to burn that string the first, And here I'm listening to this in the middle of January, listening to and doing this interview with him. And I'm like, man, I can't wait to this spring get out with my kids, get them out there, teach them how to get the kindling going, and then start doing some little competition. So just basic, simple things like that we can do to get off the couch and to get out there and start doing some different things to become that father that really we know we need to be.
Yeah.
And the man that we want to be, and to understand and get a better grasp on what that means, because a lot of this stuff is it seems really, really difficult to get into. And if we can kind of lower that bar just to simplify it a little bit, I think that could be a benefit to all of us.
Oh yeah. I mean, like me, for instance, I didn't grow up hunting. I know how to fish. And I'll be honest, before I heard your podcast on bushcraft, I had never heard of bushcraft. I had no idea what that was. And so, but I thought it was great. I mean, I know a lot of guys, I have 5 sons, and I know one of my sons is really into that kind of stuff. And that's something I can point him towards, I mean, he's got a kid of his own now. And so I think that's great. So, all right, Joe. So last question. And I think this might be my tag question. We're going to see what it is. We're going to see how it goes in my other interviews. But what do you feel is the one thing churches, not men per se, okay? What is the one thing that you feel churches need to change today? You didn't know there was going to be a quiz, did you?
Well, I think the problem with the question, Mike, is you said, what's the one thing?
Oh, I know, but I'm asking you. Well, that means there's a list, and it should be easy to pick.
Well, no, I really believe, though, the thing at the top of the list is men. Mm-hmm. The statistics show over and over and over again, if you can get a man involved in your church, his family will be involved. His family will be involved for longer periods of time, and his family will stick to their foundation if their father believes in that. We as men were built in the image of God. Mm-hmm. When we look in the mirror, we see a piece of the image of God. And that is a heavy weight to bear when you really think about it. And we need to be working in our lives so that when our children see us, they're seeing God.
Absolutely.
And not that we're not making mistakes or we're gonna fail over and over and over again, but that is our standard. That is what we're living for. So that is why the men need to be in the church. The church has really done a great job of catering to the poet archetype, or like the Jesse archetype of men, and mm-hmm. making men that are more, and I don't mean it in a negative way, but are more that type of men. more, I don't know when you want to use the word effeminate, although there's a lot of that too.
Yeah.
But there's guys that are just more that direction, where I'm looking out there, Mike, and I'm seeing the warrior class of guy, the man's man, the masculine man. Really, there's no place for him in the church. And so the one thing I would say that churches could do and need to do is go back to the drawing board and understand the necessity to have men of character, men that are bold, men that are strong, coming to their church, giving them a platform to share what's going on, and give them a place. Give them a place at the table. Let them feel welcome. Make sure that they know that they belong there. And that is probably the biggest, most important thing that could be done, is to get the men back in the church. Yeah. And that right there is not an easy task, but it's necessary. If it doesn't happen, this thing is kind of done.
No, I totally agree. Totally agree. All right. Well, I think we're going to close it out, Joe. I want to thank everybody for coming, especially Joe. Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it very much. If you're watching us on YouTube or Facebook. You can also listen to the podcast on Anchor, iTunes, Pocket Cast, Overcast, Radio Public, Castbox, Breaker, Spotify, and probably 4 or 5 others I'm not aware of. You can reach us at The Sedated Man at Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube, or you can reach me at mike@thesedatedman.com. And once again, you can find the show notes on patreon.com/thesedatedman. Once again, thank you very much, Joe. And you guys go out and conquer.